Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Exodus chapter 6 in a clear and simple way, step by step. Let's look at our roadmap for today. We've got a brief context, a walkthrough of verses 1 to 9, then verses 10 to 30, some quick clarifications and ideas, practical life lessons, and finally, a short recap. Section 1, hook and brief context. Let's get situated. Before we read a single word of verse 1, we've got to understand exactly where we are in the story. You literally can't grasp the weight of chapter 6 without remembering the absolute crushing events that just went down. Think about it. Moses went to Pharaoh, made his initial request for a simple 3-day journey into the wilderness, and it failed miserably. Actually, it didn't just fail, it backfired. Pharaoh responded by brutally ramping up the workload for the Israelite slaves. He completely cut off their straw supply, but demanded the exact same daily quota of bricks. Obviously, that's impossible, so the Israelite foremen were severely beaten, they turned all their anger and frustration onto Moses, and Moses in turn cried out to God, asking why he brought such disaster on the people. So right now, morale is at absolute rock bottom. The people are exhausted, broken, and just utterly desperate. Section 2. Verses 1 to 9, walkthrough. Let's see how God responds to this crisis. So, picking up right at the start of our first block, verses 1 through 9, God responds to this massive crisis. Moses is basically second-guessing his entire mission, right? In verse 1, God steps in and assures Moses that not only is Pharaoh going to let the people go, but he's actually going to be forced by a strong hand to actively drive them out of his land. Then in verses 2 and 3, things get really fascinating. God clarifies his relationship with the Israelites. He says, look, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, which is El Shaddai in Hebrew. But I'm now revealing myself to you, Moses, with a new name, YHWH, which our English Bibles translate as the Lord. Now, why does this matter? Well, it represents a monumental shift. The patriarchs got the promises, but Moses and his generation, they are about to witness the actual historical fulfillment of those promises. This new name signifies a God of action, a God who is stepping right into human history to actively redeem his people. And just to drive the point home, in verses 4 and 5, God emphasizes that he hasn't forgotten them. He remembers his covenant to give them the land of Canaan, and he's heard the groaning of the Israelites. And that brings us to verses 6 through 8, which brilliantly lay out God's specific, step-by-step promises of redemption. It's like a perfectly structured 5-part action plan. God tells Moses to go back to the Israelites and say, I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. I will take you to me for a people. And finally, I will bring you in unto the land of Canaan as a heritage. Do you see the progression there? It's not just a vague, hey, I'm going to help you out. It is meticulously planned. Physical liberation from slavery, legal deliverance from servitude, an awe-inspiring rescue, spiritual adoption, and a brand new geographic destination. It's an all-encompassing promise that covers their past suffering, their present rescue, and their future destiny. But then we hit verse 9, and it is just incredibly tragic. Moses goes and delivers this massive, historic, mind-blowing news to the Israelites. And what happens? They completely ignore him. The text tells us they hearkened not unto Moses for impatience of spirit and for cruel bondage. You might see it translated as shortness of breath or a broken spirit. The reality is, because of their overwhelming physical and emotional suffering, they literally cannot process what Moses is saying. They're trapped in this grueling, unending nightmare of making bricks without straw. The grand theology of covenants and redemption, it just bounces right off the brutal reality of their daily trauma. Their suffering has completely deafened them to any sense of hope. Section 3, verses 10 to 30 walk through. The mission pushes forward. Moving into the second half of the chapter, verses 10 to 30, God tells Moses to go back and speak directly to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Despite the fact that the Israelites just totally rejected him, the mission has to continue. But in verse 12, Moses pushes back with a deeply logical fear. He essentially says to God, look, if my own people, the ones we're actually supposed to benefit from this, the ones who have the history of Abraham in their blood, if they won't even listen to me, how in the world is Pharaoh going to listen? I mean, it's a solid point, right? Pharaoh is the oppressor who economically benefits from their slavery. Why would he care? It's a classic logical argument moving from the lesser to the greater. Moses feels totally defeated by his failure with his own people, making the idea of facing Pharaoh again seem absolutely absurd. In that exact same verse, Moses points to a very specific physical insecurity to explain why he can't do this. He says he has uncircumcised lips. Now let's break that down, because it's a Hebrew idiom. The plain, simple meaning of the text here indicates a literal speech difficulty, faltering lips, or just a severe lack of speaking ability. In biblical poetry, if someone has an uncircumcised ear, it means an ear that can't hear clearly. An uncircumcised heart is one that's closed off. So uncircumcised lips simply means lips that can't speak properly. Moses is basically pleading with God, saying, not only is my audience completely unreceptive, but physically, I am the worst possible messenger for this job. I literally can't speak well. Then, suddenly, right after Moses drops this profound self-doubt, verses 14 through 25 completely interrupt the narrative. We get a selective genealogy. It starts historically with Jacob's firstborn son, Reuben, and names his families. Then it moves to the second son, Simeon, and lists his families. And then it focuses heavily on the third son, Levi, breaking down his sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dropping a family tree right in the middle of this incredibly tense conversation between God and Moses seems super random, but in the biblical text, genealogies aren't just filler. They are absolutely critical for establishing historical context, structure, and formal authority right before massive events take place. This particular family tree stops and zooms way in on the Levite clan, specifically focusing on the Kohathites, to give us the exact parentage of Aaron and Moses, Amram and Jochebed. It's essentially laying out their official credentials. It's telling us exactly who these two guys are, where they come from, and how they fit into the broader history of the children of Israel. The text even goes further down the line to introduce Aaron's son Eleazar and his grandson Phinehas, which locks in the priestly line that becomes super important later on. It also clearly establishes the age dynamic. Aaron is the older brother at 83 years old, while Moses is 80 when they're commanded to go speak to Pharaoh. After we get through that genealogy, the chapter closes out in verses 28 to 30 by repeating the exact situation from right before the interruption. This is actually a brilliant literary technique called resumptive repetition. When a biblical author drops a long parenthetical block of text, like a family tree, they'll often repeat the phrasing from right before the break just to get the reader back on track. So the text zooms us right back to the very day the Lord spoke to Moses in Egypt. God repeats his command, "Speak thou unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I speak unto thee." And Moses repeats his lingering self-doubt, literally word for word, "Behold, I am of uncircumcised lips, and how shall Pharaoh hearken unto me?" We are right back where we left off. Section 4. Clarifications and ideas. Let's make sure we're getting the plain meaning here. The absolute most crucial thing here is to understand the simple, direct meaning of these events without overcomplicating them. Let's look at a key clarification regarding the plain text, what we call the Peshat. There's this incredibly stark contrast established in chapter 6 between God's grand historic promises of redemption and the immediate gritty reality of the slaves. God is operating on a timeline of centuries. He's remembering a covenant made generations ago with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The slaves, they're operating on a timeline of surviving the next 60 minutes. They're just trying to make bricks without straw while a foreman holds a whip over them. This massive disconnect between divine history and immediate trauma is totally central to understanding the psychological and spiritual dynamics of the whole Exodus story. Also, let's clarify exactly why that family tree was placed where it was. The genealogy strictly serves to document precisely who these two brothers are right before they unleash supernatural plagues upon Egypt. Think about what's coming in the next few chapters. Moses and Aaron are about to perform acts that will literally shake the foundation of the known world and bring the greatest empire on earth to its knees. The text is actively grounding them in real human history. They aren't demigods, they aren't mythical heroes who just floated down from the sky. They are the sons of Amram and Jochebed from the tribe of Levi, deeply embedded within the nation of Israel. Section 5. Practical life lessons. What can we actually take away from this? Let's explore why this matters for us today and what practical wisdom we can pull from the plain text. First off, there is a profound, timeless lesson here about human psychology. People in deep pain or cruel bondage literally cannot process good news. Moses brought the absolute greatest message in human history to his people, that God himself was stepping in to free them, but they couldn't hear it. Their spirits were entirely crushed by their forced labor. And this is a huge reminder for us to meet trauma with immense patience. You cannot preach high philosophy or grand promises of a better future to someone who is starving, exhausted, or severely oppressed. Their immediate physical and emotional needs almost always have to be met before any real spiritual hearing can take place. On top of that, Moses' intense insecurity over his faltering speech is incredibly encouraging. It reminds us that you do not need to be perfect or eloquent to be an instrument of massive positive change. Moses constantly brings up his uncircumcised lips. He is highly self-conscious about his inability to speak well, and he presents it as a completely logical barrier to his success. And yet, he is chosen to be the greatest prophet and leader in the entire biblical narrative. God uses imperfect messengers to achieve perfect results. Whatever flaws you think you have, whether they're physical, emotional, or social, they do not disqualify you from fulfilling a great purpose. Section 6, Short Chapter Recap. Let's connect all the dots. Let's briefly summarize the journey we've taken step by step through this chapter. We watched the text move very methodically. First, God steps in with powerful reassurance and a meticulously structured 5-step promise of redemption. Next, we hit the tragic reality. The people are in such deep despair that they completely reject Moses. That rejection leads straight to Moses doubting himself and developing a very logical fear of facing Pharaoh. Then, the narrative hits pause for a historical genealogy to clarify the exact human identity of our messengers. And finally, the chapter loops right back to the divine mission, with God commanding a deeply reluctant Moses to head back to the king of Egypt. And that leaves us on a pretty massive cliffhanger. We are right back where we started, but the stakes are so much higher. The Israelites won't listen. Moses barely believes in his own voice. So how in the world will Pharaoh, the most powerful man on the planet, respond to a messenger who is terrified to speak and whose own people have totally rejected him? We'll have to see exactly how God empowers Moses to face this immense opposition in the next stage of the story. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.